Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a close look at how we understand child abuse statistics. Not just the numbers themselves, but what they, well, what they tell us about culture.
That's right. We're focusing specifically on the framework presented in the LoopSpeak documents. These were authored by Devon McLarty, owned by D Investment Enterprise LLC, and published by D Publishing Group.
And the core mission here, for you listening, is really to get past the overwhelming sense of tragedy in these numbers.
And instead learn how to read them as cultural narratives. McLarty's work argues that the composition of these stats is a powerful diagnostic tool.
A tool to understand what's really happening under the surface. So we want to equip you with the key analytical concepts from these documents.
Exactly. Specifically, volume and proportion. These help uncover systemic issues that might otherwise, stay hidden.
Okay, so McLarty starts in a pretty interesting place. The documents use pop culture to kind of set the stage. There's this commercial referenced.
Yes, it's used as a rhetorical jumping-off point. It's that commercial where a couple realizes they both have grandfathers who came through Ellis Island.
Right, and then the punchline hits when they realize, oh no, it's the same grandfather.
Exactly, and everyone sort of chuckles,
Yeah.
right? Because it touches on that cultural taboo, incest being related, but in this accidental, awkward way.
It's funny because it's uncomfortable, but then the analysis takes a sharp turn.
A very intentional pivot. McLarty basically says, okay, here's where the humor stops and reality begins.
Ah, so the joke's premise.
Becomes deadly serious, that accidental taboo crossing. For some children, especially in closed, insular communities, that kind of non-consensual reality isn't an accident. It's systemic.
Wow. So it moves you from just laughing nervously at a taboo to thinking about its real-world harmful version. That's quite the setup.
It is. It forces you to confront the gravity before even getting into the numbers.
Okay, so if the humor stops there, how do these documents guide us to analyze this reality? What are the actual tools?
Right. This is where the core analytical framework comes in. To really decode what's happening, McLarty insists we need to distinguish between two key statistical ideas: volume and proportion.
They tell different stories, I gather.
Fundamentally different stories about a society or a community's underlying structure when it comes to child maltreatment.
Okay, let's break them down. Tool number one, volume. What is that exactly?
Volume is, well, pretty straightforward. It's the total number of reported child abuse cases in a given area, like a state. The overall count.
So if State A reports 10,000 cases and State B reports only 1,000, the gut reaction is State A has the much bigger problem.
That's the instinct, yes. But the LoopSpeak analysis flips that, or at least complicates it.
How so?
In certain contexts, a high overall volume covering neglect, physical abuse, sexual abuse, all categories, isn't necessarily seen as just bad news.
Okay.
It's often interpreted as a sign of institutional, strength. It suggests there are effective, trusted systems in place that encourage reporting.
So high numbers might mean the system is actually working. People trusted enough to report.
Potentially, yes. McLarty characterizes this as a problem of volume and exposure. The system is functional enough to bring the problem out into the open.
That really reframes how you'd normally read those kinds of stats. A state with tons of reported cases might actually be doing a better job of confronting the issue.
In terms of having a functional public system, yes. It suggests mandatory reporters feel safe reporting, that CPS and law enforcement are seen as responsive. The abuse isn't staying hidden within the family or community unit as much.
Okay, that's a huge shift in perspective. Now, what about the second tool? Proportion. How does that differ?
Proportion zeroes in on the makeup of those total cases. It asks, what percentage of all reported maltreatment falls into a specific, often highly damaging category, like sexual abuse?
Ah, so it's not the total number, but the relative weight of a particular type of abuse within that total.
Precisely. A high proportion in one specific category, like sexual abuse, reveals something different. It signals a potentially unique, systemic issue that might be disproportionately affecting a specific community or cultural group.
So volume tells you about the system's reach, maybe, how much it's uncovering overall.
Right. And proportion tells you about the nature or the specific kind of problem that's most prevalent, or at least most prevalently reported, even if the total numbers aren't the highest.
This distinction leads us straight into the core argument of the LoopSpeak documents, doesn't it? Connecting the data points directly to, well, culture.
Absolutely. There's a key quote you pulled out earlier that captures it perfectly.
The numbers don't just show abuse, they reveal culture.
That's the one. By looking at how these numbers break down, using volume and proportion, McLarty argues we can diagnose two very different underlying cultural dynamics.
Each needing a totally different approach, I imagine.
Completely different. Let's start with the model characterized by secrecy.
The culture of secrecy and control. What does that look like in the data?
This model describes environments like closed groups, very insular family structures, sometimes under intense religious or ideological control. The key feature is that reporting abuse is actively discouraged or suppressed.
The priority is protecting the group, not the victim.
Essentially, yes. And the statistical fingerprint for this, according to the analysis, is a high proportion of sexual abuse cases within the total reported maltreatment. Even if the overall volume isn't huge, that specific percentage is way up.
Why sexual abuse specifically?
Because it's often the most deeply hidden, the most tied to power dynamics within families or closed groups. When it does get reported out of such a system, it suggests the problem is severe and endemic, and the culture itself is built around hiding it. The problem is defined as one of secrecy and control.
Okay, that makes sense. So what's the contrast? The other model.
That's the culture of volume and exposure. This describes states or areas that, according to the analysis, have prioritized transparency and robust protective services.
And their data looks different.
Yes. The statistical fingerprint here is typically a high overall volume of reported cases across all categories: neglect, physical, emotional, sexual abuse. But critically, the proportion specifically related to sexual abuse tends to be lower than in the secrecy model.
So lots of reports coming in generally, but sexual abuse doesn't make up an unusually large slice of that pie.
Exactly. The argument is that this reflects a state where the system is functioning to bring all kinds of maltreatment into the light. The problem is framed as one of volume and exposure. The system is successfully exposing the issues so they can be dealt with publicly.
This is where the case studies become really helpful, I think, applying this framework to actual states. Let's talk about Utah. McLarty uses it as a key example of secrecy and control, right?
Yes, Utah's data is presented as, well, quite stark. The critical statistic highlighted is that 15.8% of all substantiated child maltreatment victims in Utah were victims of sexual abuse.
15.8%. And the documents frame that how?
As one of the highest proportions in the nation. That specific percentage is the flag.
So even if Utah's total number of reported cases isn't the absolute highest nationally,
You're right.
the kind of abuse being reported is disproportionately skewed towards sexual abuse. That's the secrecy fingerprint.
That's exactly the interpretation in the LoopSpeak documents. And it doesn't just leave it at the number. The analysis explicitly links this high proportion to the documented influence of specific insular communities within the state.
Communities known for prioritizing internal control over state intervention.
Precisely. The source cites examples you might recognize: the systemic issues within the FLDS, the abuses connected to the Kingston clan, the Morris family scandals. These aren't just isolated incidents. The argument is they reflect a broader cultural dynamic within parts of the state that drives that high proportion statistic.
So the data confirms a culturally embedded issue, not just, say, random crime or general societal stress.
That's the argument. It points to specific cultural structures enabling and hiding this particular type of abuse.
Okay, now let's contrast Utah with Maine and Massachusetts. These are presented as examples of the volume and exposure culture. What does their data show?
Well, if you just look at raw rankings of total reported abuse cases per capita, states like Maine and Massachusetts often appear quite high. You see a lot of reports coming out of those states.
Which, again, might instinctively look like they have a massive problem.
Right. But applying the LoopSpeak framework, that high volume is interpreted differently, especially when paired with their proportion data.
So their overall numbers are high, but the percentage of those cases that are sexual abuse is lower than Utah's 15.8%.
Significantly lower, yes. The analysis suggests this high overall volume isn't necessarily a sign of rampant abuse unique to those states, but rather a sign of functional systems.
Functional how?
Okay.
What makes their volume high?
The documents point to things like robust child protective services, significant state funding for intervention, and crucially, very strong mandatory reporting laws.
Meaning more people are required to report suspected abuse.
Yes, often extending beyond just doctors and teachers to include, say, coaches, camp counselors, volunteers. When you lower the barrier to reporting and people trust the system will actually do something, you tend to get more reports across the board: neglect, physical abuse, everything.
So the system is effectively casting a wider net, catching a broader spectrum of maltreatment.
That's the idea. It's bringing more issues into the open, which naturally dilutes the proportion of any single category, even one as serious as sexual abuse. Their problem is one of volume and exposure. The system is working to expose the problems.
So, high total cases, but a more balanced profile of abuse types being reported suggests the system is capturing the breadth of the issue rather than just the most severe or impossible to hide cases leaking out of a secretive structure.
That's the core distinction McLarty wants you, the listener, to grasp, moving beyond just more is bad or less is good.
It's about understanding why the numbers look the way they do. Is it a symptom of secrecy revealed by a high proportion, or is it a sign of a functional system revealed by high volume?
Exactly. It stops you from making snap judgments based on headlines or raw counts alone. You have to ask why.
And the analysis doesn't just stop with interpreting data, it circles back to us, to society. There's a strong ethical challenge here about complicity.
Yes, the McLarty documents don't pull punches on this. The argument is that when these patterns, especially the high-proportion data linked to secrecy and control, are visible, societal inaction becomes a form of looking away, a form of complicity.
We started with that Ellis Island joke, right? Where society kind of nervously acknowledges the taboo.
Right, we can chuckle at the commercial because it feels distant, accidental. But the documents challenge us. What happens when that taboo isn't a joke? When it's real? Systemic abuse, incest, forced marriage, control happening within closed families or religious groups?
Do we still look away then? Or refuse to see how cultural structures can protect abusers?
It's a really uncomfortable question about collective responsibility. Are we willing to confront the reality when it's not packaged as humor, but revealed in stark statistics linked to specific cultural practices?
It really underscores the power of reading these statistics critically.
Absolutely. Statistics, viewed through this lens of volume versus proportion, become more than just numbers. They act as cultural diagnostics.
Revealing those hidden stories, the underlying architecture of a society, does it protect kids or does it protect the systems that harm them?
It forces us to ask deeper questions. Not just how many incidents, but what kind of culture allows these specific patterns to persist.
Which brings us to the final thought. The LoopSpeak documents leave us with a challenge, really. Something for you to consider.
It loops back, fittingly, to that initial analogy. The question posed is essentially this. Do we just chuckle at the Ellis Island joke, or do we recognize that for some kids the punchline is their life story?